Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here from inside my hotel room at Circa in Las Vegas. I spent the entire morning at Radio Row. Jeremiah, I got up at 5:30 in the morning to take a taxi over to Mandalay Bay, and then I was on with Ross Tucker, a former offensive lineman. We talked
Yep.
offensive line PFF grades in my book, and it's been a pretty wild experience. And then I was just down here. Anybody who knows Vegas knows Fremont Street and how interesting that can be on Fremont Street. I had another radio hit down here, so it's been a pretty fun time, man. But you know what I've observed is that people want to talk about off seasons and where quarterbacks are going and what's happening with Kirk, and not as much about the football game. Is this one lacking some buzz, or what's going on here?
I think it's just still building. I think everyone knows these are two incredibly talented teams. Like, there's no really underlining storyline for either team right now. I mean, the most is, hey, Patrick Mahomes' dad got his third DUI, right? Like, that's kind of the only drama that's going around between these two teams. You watch the introductory press conferences last night. Kelsey and Kittle are sitting there just loving up on each other. You're the best. No, you're the best. Right. And then I think everyone's now either planted their flag in Purdy sucks or Purdy's great camp. And they've been fighting all year anyways. I just feel like there's not a lot of bad blood between these teams. Like, there's not a lot of hate. There's not a lot of trash talk back and forth. It's like the Niners are like, oh, the Eagles suck and they suck. And then the Chiefs are kind of doing their own thing. So I just think it's a lack of storylines besides just the game, which us as talking heads, we can only talk so much about for 2 weeks in a row.
Right, exactly. So I want to get into some of that though, because I think it has, well, a lack of lead up buzz that maybe Detroit being here would have had the city has gone through so much. Everything. Well, Kansas City's gone through nothing. It's been 1 year. And even San Francisco, look, I think San Francisco has the second most playoff wins over the last decade or so. I mean, this is a team that is kind of always there and always succeeding, but the matchups individually are super interesting. And you being a football man, we'll break those down in a moment. But I wanted to ask you about this. So I was on Las Vegas radio this morning, and the number one question was, what do you think?
What's happening with Captain Kirk?
That is correct. And should the Las Vegas Raiders pursue Kirk Cousins? Yeah, that was kind of an interesting angle. Now, my initial feeling was I don't think that Kirk wants to go be in a division with Mahomes after he was in a division with Aaron Rodgers for most of his time in Minnesota. But I haven't really taken them seriously as a team that Kirk Cousins could join. Should I?
I don't I don't think Kirk wants to live in Las Vegas, right? You take it down to who the guy is. He's made a gazillion dollars. I don't think he wants to take his family. I mean, it's no secret Kirk is a Christian man, honors family values. Like, the last place he wants to live is Sin City. Right? Like, I can't imagine him wanting to put that on his like pop resume, especially he's looking for an end of year, probably end of career type destination. Maybe the money's worth it, and maybe that all speaks to it. But I feel like Kirk is not the type of personality that the Raiders are going to want at their quarterback position, especially with their Antonio Pierce being a big personality. Like, I look at those locker rooms after the wins with Antonio Pierce. I don't see plug and play Kirk Cousins walking in there doing the cigars and French inhaling through the nose type of stuff with Max Crosby and the boys. I just don't think it's a great personality fit, which is an equal part of being a quarterback to a franchise as much as the playing is.
No, I completely agree. I didn't really think of that part of it. And look, personally, I haven't seen any sins committed at
Oh, I'm
all.
sure.
In
I'm
since I've
Well,
been-
did you go to
let,
bed before
let
9
me tell you
p.m.?
let me tell you what a weird time of day is in Las Vegas. 5 o'clock in the morning, because you walk out and there's like somebody who's all strapped up in their jogging gear, like out there jogging because the weather's awesome. And then there's somebody who's having a really tough evening still at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's a weird place to be. You're right. But I think that does go for, if you're looking for a different type of like breathing fire quarterback, we know that Kirk Cousins is not that guy. And he was a good personality fit with Kevin O'Connell, but not necessarily with Mike Zimmer. And if I were to put Antonio Pierce in a bucket, I would put him in the Mike Zimmer bucket, much closer to Kevin O'Connell. Do you think it comes down to, because I rejected it. They asked me, do you think that the Raiders should get Kirk Cousins? I didn't say because of Jesus, but I did say, like, I just don't think it's a good timeline fit for them. I don't think that that team is really in a position to compete for a Super Bowl. They are, I think, a decent roster, and
Mhm.
Devontae Adams being there is awkward, I think, with where the rest of the roster is, because I think they've got a lot of young players, but I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender. I think they need to be way stronger as a top to bottom roster. Is it basically Atlanta, Pittsburgh, or Minnesota with Kirk Cousins, you think?
I think so, unless he truly believes, and we don't know that he's got 6, 7 years left in him, right? I mean, that's always a factor to we look at some quarterbacks and we look and go, okay, he's 36 coming off the Achilles, probably 2 years left in his prime, or maybe he's already on the back end. But sometimes these quarterbacks, reinvigorate themselves when they go somewhere else, or they feel like, oh, I could play until I'm 45. Like, I'm just gonna keep taking care of my body, I'll be fine. So if he views it as a long-term fix, like, hey, I want to go with the young team, build a roster around me type of thing. I have Devontae Adams there, probably, but I think you nailed it with teams that are closer than the Raiders and also are kind of in that window of young players that are contributors, but also some really good vets on that team, right? You look across the board on the Raiders, I don't see a ton of like vets besides Max Crosby and Devontae Adams and kind of who's the other big voices in the room. You know what I mean?
So you're an agent, and I am very curious about why you're not as good as Mike McCartney at being an agent. No, that's not what I'm talking about, but you're not, and no one is. But when it comes to that's like saying you're not Mahomes. But
Right.
when it comes to all the other stuff that is not money, like how much would you factor that in a situation like this? Like, I'm curious about this conversation with Kirk Cousins that's going to go on, because I feel like with him, it's gotten to the point where he has to really decide basically on just the best fit for him for all the other factors, and assume that someone is going to pay him as much as franchise quarterbacks generally get.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's going to come down to before the combine. Kirk and McCarthy are gonna have to sit down and say, okay, what are your parameters, Kirk? Like, is this just, hey, go to the combine and find me the team that's gonna pay me the most money? Right? Oh, cool. If that's the parameters, sweet, game on. Right? Or are there bumpers in the lane here of like, hey, it's got to be this team that has these type of supporting casts, or hey, it needs to be a team that has this type of max deal, but they have the plan laid out for their draft and what they're going to do and all those things. And he has to take into factor all those, and he's going to walk into the combine with a plan that Kirk has laid out for him. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think Kirk's going to be like, I want the right fit, I want this, but then there's another part of my brain that's like, Kirk loves him some Kirk, and he's going to want to go make some money, right? I just don't know which camp Kirk's in right now. I mean, you hear him talking with the suit on, looking good, and talking about like, I still feel like it's the dollars represent whatever it is. It's like I don't know where he's at in his career of chase the ring or still wanting to get paid.
If I were Kirk Cousins, I would be saying, what's the one thing that bothers me the most in my NFL career? And it would be left guards who couldn't block. No, that's a joke. But the Vikings don't have a left guard under contract, so that's not great. But if I were Kirk Cousins, I would say, well, was I rewarded financially for my performance? Absolutely. One of the highest paid quarterbacks of the last decade. Was I empowered as a leader? Eventually, not always, but eventually. Do I have people that I like? If I was I given great wide receivers? Oh, absolutely. Blessed from the time that he stepped on the field. What's the one thing I don't have? I don't have playoff wins. And what's the thing that that podcaster keeps bringing up over and over again? It's playoff wins. And that's where I think that if you're putting everything in order, I'm sure that the city is a factor, but I think it's probably playoff wins, that he wants to be like Steve Young saying, I got the monkey off my back. And like all the people who have said he can't win in the playoffs, including us, a lot of times I would want to be able to win and then go to that podium after the Super Bowl and be like, I couldn't, like, I hope, I know he's not like this. I would want him to be just as snarky as me. Matthew Stafford should have. Oh, it was my fault in Detroit. It was not my fault in Detroit. Actually, that's one of the things that's missing about this Super Bowl is nobody can be like F you, except for Brock
Yeah,
Purdy, I guess a little bit, but not really. Not most people like Brock Purdy. It's like
right.
5%. But
Yeah.
I think that would be the biggest thing for Kirk, though, is that I think that he has tried super hard to tune out what people say about him, but I think he's always cared about what people say about him.
Okay, so if that's the case, what's the right answer? Is it Pittsburgh? Is it Atlanta? Like, I don't none of those teams that you just mentioned, in my opinion, scream win the Super Bowl over the next 3, 4 years unless they make some drastic changes. I mean, Atlanta's probably the closest. I mean, Pittsburgh is always, but Mike Tomlin, how much longer does he want to be around? Those type of things. I don't know. I don't know the right answer, but if you're Kirk Cousins, like you just laid out, and your goal is playoff wins, where are you wanting to go, and do you think fits you best?
So I think that Atlanta and Pittsburgh is a hard conversation because in Pittsburgh, Lamar, Joe Burrow, and Cleveland's roster are tough to overcome. If
Mhm.
not for quarterback injuries and stuff in the division, I'm not sure that Pittsburgh even makes the playoffs this year with Mason Rudolph and such and so. But you're also be saying, like, I don't know, Mike Tomlin wins all the time. Like, I'm going to be in the
Right.
playoffs probably. We'll find a way with Mike Tomlin. They have great wide receivers. But then you go to Atlanta, it's a little less proven. It's a head coach with not a ton of experience. Tampa Bay years ago, and then interim head coach, but a similar offensive system. Like, how much does he care about not having to relearn all the language? Well, Zach Robinson came from Los Angeles. It's probably a lot of the same terminology, and also a former quarterback that he can work with that understands the way that he's viewing the game as well. I lean toward Atlanta over Pittsburgh for that, but also for you're going to be in the dance, brother. I mean, look at that NFC South. My God, it's horrifying. If Baker Mayfield goes somewhere else, Carolina's not going to be anywhere anytime soon. New Orleans needs to make like $90 million in cap space. I had a long argument with someone over whether the cap was real today. It is. So,
What? Hold on, back up. Someone argued that it wasn't?
yeah, so there's a little like there's always been a meme of like New Orleans of the cap isn't real. They could just keep pushing money down the road. But eventually the bill came and their roster is kind of a mess. And
Yeah.
that's what happened to the Vikings. Eventually the bill came for all the money they pushed down the road to sign like Anthony Barr and give everybody an extension and Kirk, obviously. And that's what happened in 2020, 2021, et cetera, is they couldn't really pay for anything. Even 2022, they couldn't beef up the roster as much as they wanted to around that like last all in kind of season. So yeah, there's restrictions, but I think the argument was more that like if you want to, you can do whatever you want as long as your owner will pay for it, which is not true. But what is true is that you can pry your window open for a couple years by messing with the salary cap as long as you're willing to pay the consequences years down the road. And that's where, I would give the Vikings front office credit is like they've had to undo all of that over several seasons here from what Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer did to pry the window open. So the cap, yes, very real, but like that's definitely part of it.
Got it. Okay. I'm with you. I'm picking up what you're putting down now.
Okay. So we're good there.
I was just very confused. Like, how would someone argue that? Like, it's a set number every single year.
Yeah. I think it's really just about manipulation. Like manipulation is real, but only for so long would be
Yes.
the salary cap.
What is
So
it? The chickens, Wolf of Wall Street. Eventually, the chickens come home to roost. Like, eventually, the chickens come home to roost, my friend. It's not just free money. You can't just print more of it.
and we have been roosted, right? Like right here, we have been roosted. $28 million in dead cap doesn't go anywhere for Kirk Cousins. You can spread it out, but it doesn't disappear. I have another question for you, a draft related question. So
Yes.
you did not go to the Senior Bowl this year, but you are
No.
very familiar with the Bowl of Seniors, which now includes juniors, so it's just a bowl. But here's my question. Post Senior Bowl, the mock draft universe, the Illuminati of mock drafters, have dumped the stock of Bo Nix and Michael Penix. And you can actually see this on paper if you go to mock draft database. And now your guy, JJ McCarthy, of whom you have a jersey of and a signed tattoo of his name across your thigh, he is now projected as the only other first round draft pick other than the top three. My question for you is coming out of the Senior Bowl, do you think mock drafters are overreacting? Or do you think that that's the reality that we were overrating some of the other quarterback prospects?
I think it's a little bit of both. You have to be really careful falling in love or turning on a guy based off of an all-star performance, right? Especially at the quarterback position. There's obviously red flags that can pop up, but in 3 days, can you really tell what a quarterback is, or is he who he is on tape? Right. And every team values that differently. Like there's certain teams that could care less about the combine. Like, for example, the Rams don't even go to the combine. Like they don't even show up. Like you look across the board or up on the boxes in Indy when everyone's running and the Rams is dark. Right. So it just really depends on what teams put as heavy like make breaks. And I always tell guys when I'm recruiting them, like, hey, your film is 85% of what's going to get you drafted or not. The pre-draft process is 15% of that. Right. What you do in that time, including the all-star games, you can go up or you can go down. But I don't think it's a drastic thought to think, hey, man, Penix and those guys, maybe they're not the pro guys that we're ready for. And I'm not saying that they're not the pro ready. They're maybe not just top 10. Right? Maybe they're not top 15. Like those are the guys that you have to count on right away to come in and be the dudes. And I still think Penix is still the most accurate quarterback in this entire class based off of his tape. Did he have some errant throws at the Senior Bowl? Yeah, but none of the guys down there besides Spencer Rattler apparently had a great week. But are we really going to say, oh, because of 3 days in Mobile, Spencer Rattler has now vaulted all these dudes? We've watched Spencer Rattler. We know what he can do. We know what he sees when the bullets are going. He is who he is. So I don't buy too much in the mocks because everything's going to change at the combine. Right. All of a sudden, if Penix goes and throws at the combine, which he probably won't because most quarterbacks don't. But, if one of these guys goes to the combine and throws really well and runs really well, guess what? Their names will start to trickle back up to the top. Like everything's just so fluid right now. And the NFL is putting puzzle pieces together on each one of these players, right? Trying to put the picture together of who they are, what they matter. I don't put too much stock into it right now in February. We'll have a much better picture as we get closer in April.
And so I looked at this, and what I noticed was that a lot of players' stock in the public will rise and fall with things like this. That even interestingly at the combine, a bunch of people in the mock draft universe dropped Will Levis last year and then must have not had confidence in that and brought him back up as the process went along. But actually, he went to the combine and people weren't impressed. His throwing wasn't all that good at his pro day, which was right around that same time. And I think that was really the truth, maybe, that what people thought about him. So trying to figure out now is, I think, really difficult. And we can't put too much into where people are mocking those quarterbacks right now. But I think we will be a little closer after the combine to at least having some sense for those three, because I think the other three are pretty much locked into that top 5, at worst 7 or 8. But if you get there, then you've got other teams like the Giants, the Falcons, who might draft a quarterback. The Falcons could do the get Kirk and draft a guy type of thing if they wanted to. But a part of it has made me like a little, and I was talking to at Radio Row. The best description I could give is a former head coach who had a lot of success in the NFL. That's all I want to do with that. Okay. And I was laying it all out to him. I'm just like, well, and then they got Kirk, and then they got these players, and then this guy and that guy, and they could do this and they could do that. And I was like, and then there's JJ McCarthy, and I don't know about this. And he just stops me and he says, rarely can you win with a game manager, was exactly what he said. Rarely can you win with a game manager. And so I guess what I thought was Penix, McCarthy, and Bo Nix. And which one of these guys in the NFL would have to be a game manager? I think McCarthy has potential not to be, but certainly was at Michigan. And Penix has the arm not to be. Nix can make some plays, but one of the hard things, Jeremiah, is like somebody in college looks like they're a playmaker and then goes to the NFL and like they can't run away from defensive ends. Nix runs like a sub 4.6, but like if he does that at the combine, I'm like trying to figure out, like, it was sort of this cryptic, like, rarely can you win with a game manager. I'm like, who do you mean, sir? Like, do you mean Kirk? Do you mean, like, what do you mean? And then he just walked away. And I was like, oh,
I mean, I'm with you on a guy in college can deceive you, right? I mean, a Bo Nix running away from a guy from Washington State is not the same as him running away from Joey Bosa, right? Those guys close so much quicker in the NFL, and you can see it with guys like Jaden Daniels or even when Lamar Jackson in college, like not just pulling away, but like leaving dudes in the dust, right? Like it's like, oh, there's no one catching him and he's got one step and gone. None of those guys you mentioned are the elite playmakers with their feet. Right. Like they're just not. They're not the dude that's going to scare you in the NFL to go. Now, I think all of those dudes have the playmaking ability with their feet, like Brock Purdy. right? Hey, I can escape. I can go get 15. I can go get 20. But is the argument when you're drafting a guy in the top 10 or even in the top 15, is that what you're looking for? Are you looking for a dude that with the arm talent paired with the athletic ability can take the top off at any time? And it's just a conundrum because people probably didn't think Josh Allen could run the way that he could, right? He wasn't running all over the place in Wyoming like he does in the NFL now. And at the same time, Joe Burrow, we know he can't really run, but he can still move just enough, but the arm talent is there. I think when you get outside of the top three, right? Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, it's kind of pick your poison of what are you putting more stock into? Is it the arm talent? Is it the mobility? Is it the kind of jack of all trades, master of none, like a JJ McCarthy, in my opinion? Like, I just don't know where you look at it, and everyone's going to define it differently, but every scheme is also so different, right? Jalen Hurts does not fit well in a Kevin O'Connell scheme, right? But so every team's going to be able to force one way or the other. The problem is if you don't get what you want to in free agency, you almost force your hand into having to take one of these guys as a quarterback at some teams because you don't really have many options left.
So let's say, just throw a scenario at you. Let's just say that the mock drafters as of right now are pretty right for where these guys should go, which most of them are projected late first or early second type of talent. If it was Madden, it would say first dash second in the draft.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's done those Madden drafts knows what I'm talking about. And so those players in the Madden drafts, sometimes they surprise you, turn out good, and sometimes they turn out very bad. Well, back end of the first round is kind of that way too. Let's just say if Kevin O'Connell and the scouting department went to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and said, look, we've only got a first dash second round grade on any of these quarterbacks. We don't really fully buy into any of them as a franchise quarterback. We think at best they could be like what Andy Dalton was in Cincinnati, which is we'd have to build a really good team around them, but you could potentially be in the mix. If you're Kwesi, do you say, you know what, we're doing it then? Or would you say, no, we have to wait until we can get our guy who's going to be our quarterback for 10 years. We need to do better than that. Which way would you go with it?
I would go towards you get the Andy Dalton and you get that guy in the first, because like we've talked about for the last few weeks, you don't want to be picking in the top 10 again, right? Unless you accumulate it from a pick or a trade or some way that like you luck your way into a top 10 because of a trade some way or another. The roster, in my opinion, for the Vikings is too good to be thinking we're going to be back in this position next year. We're going to be back to picking 11th overall with a chance to trade up and get one of these dudes. It's just you have to play and roll the dice without hurting the longevity of the team by signing another quarterback to a multi-year deal who's 36 years old, right? Or you go the other way and say, hey, we're going to bridge the gap like Baker Mayfield or some of those other guys we talked about last week, and then try and hope maybe we're in like 15 to 17 to 20 range of picking in the first round, and then maybe have some draft capital pick up. But I think with where we're at this year as a Vikings organization, you say, hey, if he's got a late first, early second, and we find ourselves in position to take this guy, we need to take it. Or, as Rick Spielman said, trade back, accumulate them picks to see what we can find out there in the back end of the first if some of these guys are projected to still be there.
I'm trying to think about who the worst quarterback comp would be that you would say yes. Like if Kevin O'Connell said, hey, I'm comparing Bo Nix to this guy, if you'd be like, all right, you know what? We're going to do that then. Like what's the last guy on your list? Is it like Tua maybe? I mean, Tua was amazing this year though. So I don't know. Then he led the league in passing and people act like he's just a dope. Derek Carr?
That's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, Derek Carr, he's up there. I mean, gosh.
I think I might have it. What about
Okay.
Ryan Tannehill?
There you go. That's a good one. I'm in on the Ryan Tannehill. But he's won a lot of games. He's won a lot of playoff games, right? He's not in a lot of playoff games, but he's led that team to a lot of winning seasons, and eventually. But the difference with Tannehill is they had the run game built around him, and they had King Henry standing back behind him. No, I think of the comp for me is maybe early Baker Mayfield, right? Like a guy that is going to come in and a lot is promised, and you think, I know he's the number one overall pick, but he's going to be a guy that's going to need to take some lumps and some growth, but has the potential. The issue with all these quarterbacks is lumps and growth for them. Now they're 27, Right, and they're old. They're not old by normal people's standards, but when you're talking about lumps and growth as young players, you want the Lamar Jackson lumps and growths of 22, 23, 24. Oh, now you're in your prime at 25 years old. Right? That comes the issue, and that's where the age factor comes in when you're talking about guys that may not be right away ready to walk in there and contribute and win at a high level.
I think if you told me it's what Baker Mayfield was this year, I'd be like, I think so, because of the rookie contract and how much you can
Mhm.
do around that. But it might have to be like a shade better than that. I think I would need a shade better than what Baker Mayfield was this year. And I don't know if any of these guys are going to get that comparison, if they're going to be better than that. If it is Ryan
Right.
Tannehill and you can create an efficient offense with him and build it off of a run game, you can win a lot of games that way if you have a great team and give yourself a chance. But I think a lot of people would say no to all of those. They would say, like, no, I want to shoot higher. I want to shoot higher. And that's when we get into the trade up scenarios. So both you and I are a little pressed for time. You have a life, and I'm here with like 700 radio appearances and stuff. So keep it short here. I want a rapid fire, love to see it, hate to see it, but tell me what, like, the Kansas City players hate to see with San Francisco and what San Francisco players would hate to see for Kansas
Yeah.
City.
Yeah, so love to see it is the Kansas City run game against the 49ers run defense after what the Packers and the Lions both did to the Niners initially, especially the first half of the lines of running the football, how the Kansas City has got here with the running back of Pacheco and just pounding up the middle with stutter and counter schemes and really through the A gaps. That's something I'd be very concerned about as the Niners defense. I think the other side is Brock Purdy the Niners should be scared about pressuring Brock Purdy because he has been excellent this year against the blitz. He has been fantastic. You think of like 119 quarterback rating, very good at identifying, seeing the field, knowing where his answers are with guys like Kittle, Debo, and Ayuk. So Spagnola and his all over the place, Drew Tranquil coming off the edge, sneak him like all over the place. Risk reward, right? You may be able to get to him and get to him early and rattle him, but they have the playmakers to rip them off over the top. I think if Joe Tooney is hurt, I'm not sure if he's going to be in playing or not. Eric Armstead is a big difference maker. Hargrave is a big difference maker on the interior there. And same thing, Chris Jones on the interior against John Feliciano and those guys on the interior. I think he's probably not going to bump out over the tackles as much this week because they have really good tackles. But Chris Jones is going to be a nightmare in the middle.
Yeah, I think if you are Kansas City, you hate to see Debo Samuel have a lot of time to rest up that shoulder because he is what makes it tick. And I think Steve Spagnuolo, his number one goal is how can I take Debo Samuel out of the game? Because I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think, of course, McCaffrey has been super, super valuable for them. But it seems like when Samuel is not there, and we saw that against the Vikings, that's the guy who you can do nothing and have tons of success. Do nothing,
Right.
throw it behind the line of scrimmage. Oh, 18 yards. Wonderful. We'll just trot up there and do it again. And then the opposing team gets so anxious that they try to load up, and then you go over the top to Brandon Ayuk. Like, it all kind of builds off of that. I think if you are San Francisco, the thing that you hate is that Mahomes has one sack and no interceptions and has just seemed unfazed by anything. And he's the thing you probably hate the most is he's beaten better teams than you. Like,
Mm.
Baltimore is a better team than San Francisco, and he beat them with no real problems. And their team did it, but his chemistry with Travis Kelce, I think, was hurt by Kelsey's injury earlier this year. Like, he didn't have the same burst. Well, he's healthy now too. So it is it really is like a matchup of two of the best teams, and we shouldn't be mad at it because I think it will create a really, really compelling game that we can analyze from a bunch of different ways, but like without so much Super Bowl radio row hype and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's two teams that you didn't expect the Kansas City Chiefs to be here, but no one expected them to not be here either, right? Everyone's always like, man, they're down here, but they might still be able to. Right? Two fantastic teams going to battle it out. Really excited to watch this game.
I mean, the true hype has been around my book on Radio Row. Like, I just
Yes.
couldn't fight everybody off, and so forth. Okay, well, it's a little bit shorter of an episode because we got to run, but next week will be our final Tuesday morning left guard of the season. You'll still pop in and out, but as
Of
far as
course.
like every single Tuesday, we'll break down the entire Super Bowl and then preview the Vikings offseason, like what is coming next. So that'll be really fun. Thanks for your time as always. And I will see you when I am back in Minnesota. Thanks,
Yes,
Jeremiah.
enjoy it. Put it all on red.